there's something else that I want to talk about, which I guess is inspired by my sister because she's kind of made me realize and think about how people end up in debt. And I don't want to talk about her. I will, but I don't want to talk about her. But I want to try and make it broad. So, I'm also thinking about celebrities. There's quite a lot of celebrities who I've heard have got into debt. And, thinking about the problems or the risks that my sister might face, I kind of realised, like, if she was to go down the path of taking out a £300,000 mortgage, which they haven't actually let her, the banks have actually said she can only take out 2,300, and therefore her chance of getting into having to lose all the properties is going to be very slim, considering I also I'm not actually going to buy her out. My goal will be to go to America and to sell the property in Birmingham, and if that's the case, and if it's worth 180,000, we'd both get 90,000. Therefore, if Sophie is in, well, if she does take out a £230,000 mortgage, and she's also got the 130 that she's already got, so she'll be 300 and something debt. But yeah, this 90,000 that I would give to her from selling the house, that would help pay off. So it's not quite as bad, but I don't think she's going to go for it because I think she really wants more. She wants, you're not going to get, if she's only got 50,000 that she can put in a deposit, and take out another 100,000 in her flat. The maximum that she'll be able to borrow would be 130, which means that she would only be able to buy somewhere that's like 2,700, and she's not going to be able to buy a house for 270. She should be able to, in a world that's nice, she should be able to buy a house for 270,000, considering the average income in England is about 30,000. 200, that's quite a lot of money, and if the average income is only 30,000, then houses shouldn't be 400,000. That should be what you'd get. You should be able to get a lot more for your money. You should be able to live in the centre of London for that. But no, four-bedroom houses in the centre of London are like 3 million. So I just don't know how this housing system has got so bad. But I think it is, and I think the banks are just getting richer and richer off loaning out lots of money to people who think that it's a good idea. And it was a good idea. If you buy a house very cheap and then 10 years later you find your house is worth 10 times as much, you can sell the house, you can pay off the mortgage, and then you're left with quite a lot. And I think quite a lot of people have done this. So a lot of people have seen that there's a lot of money in housing. When I first wanted to be a property developer, this was when I was 12, so this was back in 2000. In 2000 I really wanted to buy a property because I was seeing how good the property market was, but my dad wouldn't buy a 12-year-old a house, and I was really pissed off with him for that. But anyway, I completely fucked I'm in Birmingham because he didn't let me have that, or even when I was 18 he still didn't want to, but yes, that was just him not wanting to help me. Anyway, I know how I can see how people can get into debt. There are a lot of singers and celebrities who perhaps get lucky, get some good breaks, and then they start having a name for themselves, and then they start doing interviews, they start making huge amounts of money, and then they start having this sort of belief that money is easy to make. Why? Because they were able to make it so easily, and then they start kind of having this sort of self-belief that, oh, they've made 300,000 in the first year, 600,000 in the second year, and they kind of think that this wealth is going to increase, or it's just going to stay the same. And then something happens, maybe their name loses out, or maybe other people start becoming more famous, and people aren't going to pay you the same amount of money that they paid you when you were younger, and now that you're your name isn't so famous, they're not going to give you the same kind of money deals or make the same kind of offer, or maybe not even opportunities. You could make a huge amount of money for singing one song at someone's birthday, and then you might find that a few years later your name's no longer big, and people don't even want you to play for to sing in their birthday or their concert or whatever for even half the amount. And then suddenly, if you've committed yourself to all these sort of mortgages, if you bought yourself like a big mansion that's a big £10 million mansion, and on the belief that you'd be able to earn this much money each year because that's what you did in the past. When you earn lots of money like that, it's very easy to think that you'll always earn lots of money like that, only for reality to hit and for you to realize that actually your fame is no longer there, and you can't get the gigs that you once did, and you don't have the maybe skills, or maybe you have an accident and you can't even perform as much. I guess if that happens, you can start using suing as a way of getting famous, or getting getting rich. Getting suing companies saying I should have been able to do this and now I can't. But I don't know. That kind of leads to corruption, and then the wealthy people not liking you, and wanting to sort of trick you into. I'm sure there's a lot of singers that are not doing or making good choices. I know Angel of the Sean King, is it his name? Is the one that I heard he's ended up in debt. I've called him Angel of Blasphemy. I've heard he's got into debt through making loads of bad choices, and companies no longer liking him because he was taking out loans on the false belief that he had lots of wealth and he was going to pay it back when really he couldn't. I know that, I think him or his mum ended up in prison or something. I know that there's people that can fall into debt. I don't know about Katie Price's situation. I've heard she's gone bankrupt, but I don't know why. I don't know enough about why she would. But it's making me wonder, like, how singers end up in debt. And then I am thinking about my sister, and I am thinking that, when she split, well, she was with a rich partner for a very long time. Okay, when they first got together, he didn't have a job, and then he did, because they were met when they were 15, and then he did have a job. He went to Cambridge University, he got a good degree, and he started earning probably 40,000. Then he started getting 100,000 or 40,000 a year, and then he started getting like £20,000 bonuses, and then £50,000 bonuses, and then he got a second job, and I don't know, but his wealth increased each year, until the point where he was earning about 100,000 a year. I mean, I don't want to talk about his finances, but that was kind of why Sophie ended up so rich. Okay, she didn't get exactly half, because he got the kid as well, but she got quite a large chunk of this, and because she got quite a large chunk of this, she owned 3/4 of the Birmingham house. I only owned 1/4. So when I was living off 2,500, when I was living off 2,500, she was making 7,500 off the same property. In fact, maybe a tiny bit more, I don't know. So yeah, it's a tiny bit more than that, I think. But we did have some costs because of having to fix things and stuff, and insurance, and there are some costs to it. But if you take off that, she was making 7,500, and that was from doing nothing. She was living in Brighton, telling the people that were giving her free accommodation that she's poor, that she's been separated from her partner was treating her badly, and now she's getting free accommodation from charity people who are Christians and were trying to help her. I don't know why she chose to do that, but she was living like she had absolutely no money, whilst she was still making £7,000 a year, which is 3 times more than what I've been living off in the last few years. And then she, I guess, did have odd jobs. I don't know if they were very high paid, but when she worked hard, and then it led to some sort of collapse, and a couple of months in hospital stay, and she had a huge child support. She had to start giving child support to her ex-partner, but I think she was not paying it for a couple of years, and then a big lump sum came on, and I think they forced it out of her paycheck or something. So she did for a year pay the child support, but then she stopped working because of having another child, and then another child again, and she's not superly wealthy, but at the same time she's had a lifestyle where she's always felt wealthy, because either her partner was making a lot of money, or she was earning something whilst also having the income of this house. So every 6 months or something, I would give her a big lump of money, and for all the amount I gave her, I would take a small I'll take my 25%, and therefore I feel like she feels like she's got into this zone now where she is feeling comfortable, and she feels like this £6,000 every 6 months, or whatever, 7,500 that I give her every year. She kind of feels like that's almost like just a comfy blanket, and I think because she's renting out a room, one of her rooms in the 2-bedroom flat, that's also now becoming a comfort, even though it's not going to be long term. It's going to be 1 year and that's it. And she's got this other flat that she knows can rent out for perhaps 1,500 if she got my mum out. But my mum has been kind of verbally guaranteed to stay there for the next 2 years, so she doesn't actually have that money, even though she thinks she's earning that money each month. She thinks she's earning 1,000 from my mum each month, because my mum gave her 2 years worth of rent. So she thinks it's guaranteed, but that 2 years hasn't passed, so she can't earn any more rent on that property for another 2 years. And I think she's getting in the comfortable mindset of thinking all this money is coming in. I've still got the 7,500 from the Birmingham house, even though that's not the truth, because I've now bought a bigger share, so I'm going to be giving her less. And if I buy another 10% again, I'll be giving her even less. And so her comfy blanket is gone, but she's still thinking like someone who is earning this sort of comfy money whilst also having, you know, a couple of jobs. And she's forgetting the fact that she's now got two kids that are under 2, and or one's 1 and one's 2, and she has to pay for them, and she has to pay child support every time, and that's very expensive, and therefore I think she's living in this sort of money just flows in. I've earned this much money in the last 4 months, and therefore I can continue doing it. You know, she did say I've managed to save £4,000 in the last 4 months, while still paying off the monthly mortgage and stuff, and she thinks that that's, you know, that's proof that she can save this every single month. But I'm just like, actually, you've paid for the service charge for the next year, but in a year's time there's going to be like another £5,000 needing to pay. You need to pay another 5,000 to cover the next year's service charge, and therefore all this profit that you're making, it's not actually going to be profit. It's going to be money that comes out, and if you still owe 3,000 on the child support that you didn't pay for the first child, you know, if the first husband does start claiming child support, you know, he's not just going to start charging child support for what she's making over the last few months. He's going to be wanting that extra 3,000, and I think that's how people fall into debt, because they start believing that they're richer than they are just because they were once earning this. You know, if you once had £7,000 from me coming in every month because of the house, and then your situation changes, you sold off a lot of that, so it's not going to be as high as what it was. You know, you might start still believing that it is going to be as high, and then when you start having like £5,000 worth of service charge, you know, she's going to be hit with that next March. And of the 2 flats that she has, it's in a block where I think they want to try and make money out of being the landlord, so they've got all these really high service charges that go up each year. I think they also increase quite dramatically. I think they increase by 6% each year, so this 5,000 is going to be even more next year, and even more the year after, and if she's going to be like losing her job or something because of an argument with someone she's working with, her boss, on one particular level, you know, if she finds that she can't work, then she's going to be forced into, you know, and she doesn't, you know, she thinks that owning this house would be enough to cover her own expenses, and it's not going to be. It's not going to be enough, I think this is just how people end up in debt, because they start believing that because they've earned lots in the past, they can earn lots in the future, but really circumstances change, and they're not as wealthy as they think they are, or they're not as smart or as wise as they think they are, and they might have you know, lots of property that makes in lots of money, but then they forget about the costs and you know, and things like council tax is quite expensive if you're living in an expensive area, and you now have 3 property, or technically if they're renting then you don't have to pay, but you have to pay council tax for the 2, and but yeah, I don't want to make it all about her, but at the same time I feel like if I relate it to something that's a real experience from someone I really know, then I feel like I can understand how other people end up in debt too, because they go through a similar circumstance. Only you're probably, you know, if you're earning millions each year, and then you go and buy a £10 million house, you know, you might find that a similar thing happens, because you might have like gardeners to pay, or cleaners to pay, or you know, if you do have children being escorted to school by security guards and stuff, you know, I can understand how you might fall into debt, because there'll be a bunch of things that you think you need because you're famous, because you have the money to pay, and you don't want, you know, your kids to be hijacked and hold for ransom or something so they can get at your money, and so then you spend lots thinking you earn lots, and then the next thing you know, you realise you're not earning as much as you think you are because of all the costs that you're spending, and then you find yourself getting into debt.